Toward a Science of Consciousness is a conference held in Tucson, Arizona every 2 years, beginning in 1994. The 10th biennial Tucson Conference, Toward a Science of Consciousness, will take place April 9th through 14th at the Lowe's Botanic Canyon Resort Hotel, which is luxurious, eco-friendly. This is the first time we've had it there. We've had it downtown at the Convention Center since 1996. This year's conference should be excellent. It's very diverse, interdisciplinary, rigorous, covering all aspects of various approaches to understanding how the brain produces conscious experience, our place in the universe, and the nature of reality. Because to understand consciousness, we really have to know what's out there. And this question has gone back, started with the Greeks. Is there really something out there? Are we creating reality, or are we perceiving it as it is? Is it really like it is? And all these philosophical questions going back literally thousands of years. In the Eastern realm, in Eastern philosophy, this approach has been somewhat different in terms of more of a spiritual and more of a panpsychist, that is to say that that consciousness exists in the world rather than in the brain. So these two approaches, Western and Eastern philosophical approaches, will meet and hopefully not clash at this conference. So let's begin. I'll tell you a little bit about the program, starting with the plenary program on Tuesday afternoon, April 10th. Now the conference, there are pre-conference activities on the 9th, and I'll get to those in a minute. April 10th, we start in the afternoon in the Kiva Ballroom, the large room at Lowe's Botanic Canyon Resort, with the opening session, which is a plenary session where everybody comes and listens to the speakers in one room. And this is a very interesting session called War of the Worldviews, featuring Deepak Chopra, the famous physician and spiritual guru, you might say, TV personality, author of 65 books and very well known throughout the world. Mina Skafatis, Leonard Mlodinow, and Susan Blackmore. Now, Deepak takes a Eastern philosophical view, and he was challenged a couple years ago by Leonard Mlodinow, who was a physicist who wrote a book with Stephen Hawking called Grand Design, where they argued against the need for spirituality. And Deepak took this criticism seriously and embraced Leonard and began a dialogue which resulted in a book, a very popular bestseller called War of the Worldviews. And this book takes the two views, the Western approach espoused by Leonard and Hawking versus Deepak's Eastern approach, and kind of tries to reconcile and point out the differences and similarities. And the book has been very successful. So in this session, we will have these two views, these two opposing views presented by Deepak and Leonard, and each will have more or less a second, someone backing them up. On Deepak's side, he will have physicist Mina Skafatis, who has written a number of books, including The Conscious Universe, The Holographic Universe, who is a physicist, but also well-versed in Eastern spirituality, coming from an Eastern background. Leonard will be backed up by the well-known cognitive scientist and author Susan Blackmore, known to be a sort of a hardcore reductionist, materialist, functionalist, and ally of Daniel Dennett. So we have two opposing views with Deepak and Minas versus Leonard and Susan, and this will be the opening session to kind of set the tone. War of the Worldviews. Now that will be followed that evening by what we call concurrent sessions, where we break out into 8 separate rooms and have 8 sessions going on with shorter talks, 20-minute talks with 5 minutes discussion, each with 5 speakers. And those sessions are as follows. The first one is panpsychism and neutral monism, which is mostly Western philosophy with some Eastern spirituality mixed in. Higher order theories. Higher order theories are Western philosophical constructs that believe that there must be an executive running the show in the brain, and that area is the prefrontal cortex. And this is called higher order thought or higher order theories or hot theories, and we'll pick up that theme later. We then have another philosophical session, agency and emotion, and another on attention and psychology and neuroscience, and then the 5th on first-person methods and phenomenology, and then one on biology and consciousness with a lot of stuff on microtubules, very close to my heart. Foundations of quantum mechanics with some philosophers and physicists talking about the nature of reality and the observer effect. And then the final one is the science of meditation, EEG studies and fMRI studies of meditative states, trying to identify the neural correlate of consciousness during meditation and how that differs from normal consciousness. That will be followed by the opening reception Tuesday night, which is basically a party, and that partying will probably continue for some time. Now, Wednesday, we start with another plenary session, Searching for Consciousness, with three speakers: Melanie Boley, who's a neurologist who has worked with Stephen Lorries and Giulio Tononi and others, especially with coma patients and vegetative patients, trying to see if there's consciousness. And they've had some startling results with getting EEG and fMRI results from people who appear unconscious and comatose when they respond to things that are familiar to them, raising the question of whether there's some islands of consciousness buried inside these unfortunate people. Antonio Zadra will talk about sleepwalking and consciousness in sleepwalking and dreams. And George Mashur, an anesthesiologist, will talk about detecting and preventing conscious awareness during anesthesia. Obviously in anesthesia, and I am an anesthesiologist, we have a tacit commitment to our patient to have them unconscious during surgery. There are a few very unfortunate situations where there is awareness, and we try to prevent that. George will talk about the technology of detecting a level of consciousness and preventing it during anesthesia. The second session of the second plenary session on Wednesday is entitled Attention Without Awareness. This will include a neuroscientist, Robert Kentridge, who will argue that these two are separate, that you can have attention, unconscious attention, and consciousness without attention. These two are doubly dissociable. You can have either without the other. Jesse Prince is a philosopher who will argue that they are more or less the same. And whether this is just deferring the problem of consciousness and calling it attention or not will be debated. So this will be an interesting debate between a neuroscientist and a philosopher. The third plenary session of the day, the fourth plenary session of the conference, is Fractal Consciousness with Bayou Jade He, Peter Walling, and myself, Stuart Hameroff. Now, fractals are known to most people as patterns, which if you look closer and closer, you see the same pattern repeating at different scales, also known as scale-free or 1/f, fractal or even holographic concepts and patterns. And it's been discovered in the last few years that the brain has fractal levels in terms of structure, in terms of the network structure of the brain, and also in terms of the electrodynamics, the neurophysiology. If you measure over a long time period and look for patterns and then zoom in and look for at any one small epoch in that larger epoch, you'll see the same sort of pattern, suggesting that EEG is somehow fractal. My talk will be about consciousness as a fractal in terms of both structure and dynamics, except I will take it inside the cell. The neurophysiology goes to the level of individual neurons and membrane potentials, but I will argue that the fractal levels of consciousness go inside the neuron to microtubules and show how our theory, that is my theory with Roger Penrose, can accommodate fractal levels inside neurons in the microtubules going deeper into the neuron, into the brain, at smaller, faster, more intense levels. And I'll suggest that altered states, meditative states, even lokas in Eastern spirituality involve going deeper into finer scale structures, deeper into the brain, and perhaps even an extremely high frequency, intense level, even being free of the brain, since we get down into space-time geometry. So that'll be the section on fractal consciousness, following which we will go to concurrent sessions 9 through 16. We'll break out into eight sessions: dualism and modal arguments, the self and unity, extended, embodied, and social consciousness. Each of these sessions will have 5 speakers: neural correlates of consciousness, cross-modal perception and synesthesia, evolution and free will, altered states of consciousness, and science and spirituality. Following that, from 7 o'clock to 10 p.m. in the Grand Ballroom foyer, we'll have the poster session, where we'll have 100 or so posters. These be large boards where people put their work up on the poster, and instead of presenting one speaker to the audience circulates and goes from poster to poster. And these will be arranged thematically, There'll be a cash bar, and these are always a lot of fun, generating a lot of discussions locally. Also, there will be art tech demos with a number of speakers giving presentations relating to the visual arts and other forms of performance art that relate to consciousness in some way. And also concurrent with that will be the consciousness video games session with demos of video games related to conscious experience. Then Thursday, April 12th, the opening session will be primarily philosophical and neuroscientific, called Hot or Not. Hot is higher order theory, the idea that we need an executive in our brain to organize things. And that is championed by David Rosenthal, and he will be seconded by Hak-Wan Lau, a neuroscientist, who will present evidence for the requirement of the prefrontal cortex in consciousness. Opposing them will be Ned Block, a very famous philosopher known for access versus phenomenal consciousness. He has a different take on it than hot theory, and he will be backed up by neuroscientist Victor LeMay. So we have these two views, the hot versus the not, each with a neuroscientist and a philosopher arguing against each other. Following this will be a keynote talk by Stephen Lories, a well-known neurologist from Belgium, who has published widely on, along with Melanie Boley and others, on looking for consciousness in comatose and vegetative patients, coming up with the idea that there can be consciousness buried in these patients, and they may have some awareness going on. And what are the implications in all senses of that word? Thursday afternoon will be free. By that time, we need a break. However, there will be side trips to the Desert Museum, Old Tucson, Biosphere, Sabino Canyon, the Jeep Tour, Mount Lemmon. There will also be self-organized workshops. And then we'll come back Thursday night for the conference dinner at the Flying V restaurant at Ventana Canyon. Friday, the first plenary session is echolocation and consciousness. Echo, or echolocation, involves echoes, sound echoes. And this comes from our initial speaker will be Daniel Kish, who was blinded at birth and developed the capacity to detect objects in his environment by sound, much like bats, dolphins, and other animals. And he would tell us about his own experience, how he taught himself to do this, how he teaches others to do this. And two other speakers, Lori Thaler and Cynthia Moss, who will talk about the neuroscience of echolocation, both in humans and in animals. So this should be a very interesting session. The second session on Friday is a keynote talk by Daryl BEM called Feeling the Future. Going back to the experiments of Ben Libet in the late 1970s, there's been this evidence that consciousness involves information going backwards in time, that there's some backward time effect that allows us to have consciousness in the moment. And this has implications for free will and many other aspects of consciousness. And there have been a number of studies supporting this, but they all get relegated to the parapsychology literature, even though there's some evidence in the mainstream literature, but neuroscientists tend to ignore this. Well, Daryl BEM, a psychology professor at Cornell, did 9 studies looking at the possibility of backward time effects and found statistically significant results suggesting that we do get information from the future. It may not be information per se, but there's some feel, some notion, some sentiment comes from the future. So the title of his famous paper in a mainstream psychology journal was Feeling the Future, and that will be the title of his talk. And there will be some skeptics there, and we will debate this. The final session that day is the explanatory gap. The explanatory gap is another word for the hard problem, the question of how and why we get conscious experience, awareness, emotions, feelings, how we have conscious awareness at all, as opposed to being on autopilot or being zombies or robots doing complex behavior. But we have this complex consciousness, and that is very difficult to explain. So we will have neuroscientist Kevin O'Regan, philosopher Anthony Jack, and another philosopher, Philip Goff, talking on various aspects of the explanatory gap and how that can be approached. Following that, Friday late afternoon, will be the final group of concurrent sessions, 17 through 24, starting with phenomenal concepts, philosophy of perception, foundations of the science of consciousness, disorders of consciousness, sleep and dreams, space, time and scale, education and consciousness, non-locality and consciousness will be the last talk in that group. So those are the final concurrent sessions early Friday evening, Friday afternoon. Following that will be poster session 2. Again, we'll go to the grand ballroom foyer. There'll be 100 or so posters, different posters from Wednesday set up. The audience will circulate with a cash bar and a lot of discussion locally at each of those posters. Concomitant with that will be what we call the health demos, where we'll have a series of brief presentations or talks by people giving various takes on health and well-being and mindfulness and things of that nature, and kind of applied consciousness research, how we can help ourselves be healthier and feel better. At 10 o'clock is the famous Consciousness Poetry Slam and Zombie Blues and Talent Show. We started this 5 or 6 conferences ago with David Chalmers and I and a few others. And Poetry Slam is where anybody, any conference participant can get up and recite a poem that they've written about consciousness. It has to relate to the issues at hand. And the audience is encouraged to jeer them or cheer them, depending, and we vote on the best poem and give a prize. We'll also have what we call the Zombie Blues, led by Dave Chalmers. Zombie, that is a term that Dave coined in the philosophy realm, relevant to consciousness, which means something that looked and behaved like us but had no inner feelings, no inner consciousness, was like an autopilot or a zombie, if you will, and raising the question of whether zombies are physiologically possible, and what that would mean to be a zombie. So a zombie wouldn't feel anything, so the idea that the zombie has the blues because they don't feel anything is paradoxical and also kind of funny. So everybody makes verses to the Zombie Blues. We have a band doing a blues riff in the background, and the audience is encouraged again to sing along and cheer. So Dave leads that off, and it's a lot of fun. We also have a talent show, so there'll be music, comedy, and a few other surprises that night. Then Saturday morning, the final day of the conference, the plenary session 10, Time in the Brain, will follow up on Daryl BEM's talk and talk about various aspects of the neuroscience, physics, and philosophy of time, time perception, and what time is. Does time actually exist outside of consciousness? Or is the flow of time, the arrow of time, a complete construct of conscious perception, or consciousness per se? Some people believe that. Then the final plenary session, consciousness and psilocybin. Psilocybin is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, a hallucinogen. And we'll have 2 speakers. Catherine McLean from Johns Hopkins in the psychiatry department will talk about recent studies showing potential therapeutic benefit for various psychiatric disorders by the use of psilocybin and or mushrooms. And then finally, Robin Carhart Harris from England will talk about a paper that he and his colleagues just published in PNAS, a very stodgy but famous journal, about fMRI studies of subjects while under the influence of psilocybin. And while you might expect the brain under these circumstances where the subject is having an enhanced, very intense conscious experience with hallucinations, visual imagings, and so forth, that there's all kinds of activity. What they found, surprisingly, was that the brain seems very quiet. And what does that mean? Does that mean that consciousness has gone deep, has gone down into the molecular scale, into the quantum realm? That's what I would say. But we'll have different explanations for that. Saturday afternoon is free. There will be self-organized workshops that will develop during the course of the conference, some side trips, a tennis tournament, maybe golf, a hike, and then Saturday night we'll come back for the end of consciousness party at the Ventana Canyon Resort. This is a tradition that we've had the last number of conferences. By the end of a long, grueling, stimulating, but somewhat tiresome week, we let loose and have a good time. So that's the conference per se. Now, before the conference starts on Tuesday afternoon, Monday and Tuesday morning are pre-conference activities. Now, these include a number of workshops that are the neuroscience of music, cross-modal consciousness and synesthesia, Pranahudi-aided meditation, a meditation technique, the survival of consciousness after death hypothesis and what that might mean, and is there any evidence for that? And then in the afternoon, exploring frontiers of the mind-brain relationship, 1, and the second session on cross-modal consciousness and synesthesia. Now also on Monday afternoon, but perhaps starting Monday morning, we will have a special forum on Eastern philosophy and consciousness. And that is shown here. It's part of our special Monday activities on Eastern philosophy and the science of consciousness. And we have a number of speakers from India and elsewhere in an open forum. Each will give a brief talk on aspects of Eastern philosophy and how that relates to the science of consciousness. After that, we'll have a dinner with Deepak Chopra, and following that will be a special workshop presented by Deepak in the Kiva Ballroom on consciousness, the ultimate reality. I mentioned Deepak previously. He'll be in the opening plenary session, and he will give a workshop on Eastern philosophy and consciousness, the science of neuroscience of enlightenment, and how we can reconcile well-being, Eastern philosophy, and the science of consciousness. So those are the special events for Monday, and then Tuesday morning we'll have more workshops which will include functional neuroimaging of unconsciousness by Stephen Laurie. He's talking about the neurology of consciousness, philosophical overviews of theories of consciousness, quantum consciousness that I will be leading, exploring frontiers of the mind-brain relationship 2, and meditation 2. And then the real show begins. We gather in the Kiva Ballroom for the opening opening plenary session, and it goes on from there. So this is the 10th biennial Tucson Conference toward the Science of Consciousness. You can look at our website, www.consciousness.arizona.edu. It's a very interesting, interdisciplinary, rigorous, but a lot of fun. We're serious, but we also enjoy ourselves. And for the first time, it will be held in a beautiful, luxurious resort, the Los Ventana Canyon Resort Hotel. So I hope you come. Thanks for your attention, and see you there.